There is a small chapel inside the Tower of London, on the north edge of the Green, where the state buried the people it killed on that spot. In the autumn of 1876, the floor of that chapel was taken up for restoration, and a committee went down into the ground under the chancel to find the famous dead and set names back over them. They found a queen who had been beheaded by a sword. They found the aged countess it had taken an axe 11 strokes to kill. They found the duke who had tried to hand the crown of England to a teenager and lost his own head for it 6 months before she lost hers. They did not find the teenager. She had been buried in that chancel by every record the tower kept, near the altar where the great dead were laid. The committee dug where she was certain to be. The ground gave up everyone around her and kept her. 322 years after they put her under that floor, the most careful search that floor would ever get went looking for the girl who had been Queen of England for 9 days, and came up with nothing. Start where the record is still solid. On the 12th of February, 1554, a little before 10 in the morning, a young woman was brought out onto a low scaffold on the green inside the tower to have her head cut off. She was 16, perhaps 17. An hour before, she had stood at a window and watched the headless body of her husband come back through the gate in a cart, his head wrapped in a cloth on the boards beside it. Then, it was her turn. The subject is a biological female, 16 or 17 years old at death. The youngest body I have ever brought to this table. Born in England in 1536 or 1537, the exact year still argued by the people who study her. Died on the 12th of February, 1554, on Tower Green, inside the walls, by beheading with a single stroke of an axe. Preservation, none. And that word, on this file, does not mean what it usually means. Every other body I lay out on this table left something behind. A skeleton, a wrapped mummy, a face kept soft by a bog. This one was buried whole, in a known grave, in a named chapel, in a country that keeps its records. And it is gone anyway, not lost in a desert like a pharaoh whose tomb was never found. Buried, catalogued, and missing. Cause of death per the record, decapitation. Manner, execution. On those 2 words the file has always closed. A girl was proclaimed queen. The crown was taken back off her, and the following winter, the new queen signed the warrant. Case shut. What we are doing today is different, and stranger than that. We are not asking who killed her. She was killed in daylight, under a warrant, by the law, in front of witnesses. We are asking 2 things the record has never answered properly. Why the axe that fell on this neck fell as clean as it did, when the same instrument butchered older women a few steps away? And why, when the ground was finally opened, she was the one body that was not there? Cause of death, mechanism, manner, and the missing body. Hold the story the world was handed first, because most of what people carry is a painting. She was born Jane Grey, great-granddaughter of Henry VII through his younger daughter Mary. That made her a grandniece of Henry VIII and a first cousin once removed of the 3 Tudor children who wore the crown after him. She was famous while she lived for something that had nothing to do with the throne. One of the best educated young women in England, reading Greek and Latin and Hebrew, a committed Protestant at an age when most children are still learning their catechism. In the last months of the boy king Edward VI, dying at 15 of a disease of the lungs. A document was drawn up that set aside his 2 half-sisters and left the crown to Jane. The thread that ran through it was about religion. Edward was a Protestant. His heir by law was his Catholic half-sister Mary. The man who helped him draw the circle around Jane instead was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, the most powerful man in the kingdom, who had just married his own son Guildford to her that same spring. Edward died on the 6th of July, 1553. On the 10th, Jane was proclaimed Queen in London. She had not asked for it. By her own account, she wept when they told her and said the crown was not hers and belonged to Mary by right. She was overruled by her father-in-law, and her husband, and she was seated on the throne anyway. A girl of 16, surrounded by men who each expected to rule through her. It held for 9 days. 13, if you count from the old king's last breath. The country went to Mary. Northumberland's support melted in the field. On the 19th of July, the same council that had proclaimed Jane proclaimed Mary instead, and Jane went from the royal apartments of the Tower to a prison cell inside the same building, without ever once leaving it. Mary did not want to kill her. That is the part the martyr story skips over. Jane was tried for treason at the Guildhall that November and condemned to death. And still the new queen was widely expected to pardon a 16-year-old cousin who had been a pawn, and whom everyone knew to have been a pawn. The sentence sat unenforced through the winter. What killed her was her own father. In January of 1554, the Duke of Suffolk joined the rebellion of Thomas Wyatt against the Queen's Spanish marriage. A living figurehead the rebels had already crowned once was a figurehead too dangerous to leave breathing. The pardon everyone had waited for never came. Her father put her on the scaffold as surely as he had helped put her on the throne, and he followed her onto one of his own 11 days later. That is the history. The image is something else, and the image is what most people actually carry in their heads. In 1834, a French painter named Paul Delaroche exhibited an enormous canvas that now sits in the National Gallery in London. A girl in a white satin gown, blindfolded, on her knees in a dark stone vault, reaching out with both hands, groping for a block she cannot see, guided by an old man's hand. It is one of the most affecting things ever painted about an execution. It is also wrong in nearly every particular a pathologist would think to check. She was not in a dungeon. The execution was outdoors, on the green, in the light of a February morning. She was not in white. By the contemporary account, she wore the same dark gown she had been tried in. She recited the 51st Psalm, the Miserere, in English, all the way to its end, in a steady voice. She gave her gloves and handkerchief to the young woman attending her and her prayer book to the officer of the Tower. The executioner knelt and asked her forgiveness in the custom of the trade, and she gave it. She tied the cloth over her own eyes. The reaching for the block is real. It is there in the eyewitness record, not invented by the painter. Blinded by her own blindfold, she felt for the block and could not find it, and asked aloud what she was to do and where it was, and a bystander guided her hands to it. Then she laid her head down, said the words the psalm ends on, that into God's hands she gave her spirit, and it was done in a single stroke. That fumble lasted seconds. At the very end of a death, the same witnesses called composed from her first step onto the scaffold to her last. The painting takes those few blind seconds and makes them the whole of her. There is a variable in this death that none of the paintings and none of the martyr stories ever account for. It is not the axe. It is the age of the neck the axe came down on. I have read both ways this blade fails, on this same table. The stroke that falls too low, into the shoulders and the upper back of a frail woman of 67, whose skull had settled down between her shoulders, and takes a dozen blows to finish the work. And the stroke that falls too high, into the back of the skull of a woman whose body at 44 had already aged into its 70s, and takes 3. Both of those women died within a few steps of where this girl knelt. Both of their bodies came up out of that same chancel floor in 1876, and were named. I read the bones of one of them on this channel. Where the axe failed on them, it did not fail on her. That difference is the finding. The question is why. Understand what an axe actually needs to do. It is a falling weight with an edge on it. The condemned kneels, lays the head forward on a low block, and stretches the neck across the wood, and the blade comes straight down with the headsman's full weight behind it. Everything depends on the edge landing in one narrow place, the hollow at the back of the neck, the gap of 2 inches or so between the base of the skull and the top of the shoulders, where the spine sits close under the skin, and nothing lies in the way of the blade. On an old body, that hollow moves, and it hides. The discs between the neck bones dry and lose their height across the decades, so the whole neck shortens and the skull rides lower. The forward curve of the neck, what we call the cervical lordosis, flattens out. The spine grows little outcrops of bone at the edges of the vertebrae, the spurs we call osteophytes, and a blade can catch on them and skid. An old neck is a bad target. The headsman guesses where the hollow should be, and on an old woman, he guesses wrong, and the axe finds shoulder or skull instead of the gap. That is the whole story of the 2 botched executions on this channel. Not nerves. Anatomy the headsman could not see under the skin. Now lay a girl of 16 on the block. The discs in a young neck are full and tall and holding water, so the vertebrae stand well apart and the spaces between them are open and wide. The forward curve is deep and supple, so when she tucks her chin down to the wood, the hollow at the back of the neck opens up clean and obvious. There are no spurs of bone to turn an edge because those take decades to grow. The ligaments are elastic. The neck is slender. Every single thing an old spine does to hide the target, a young spine does in reverse. It presents it. A 16-year-old neck laid correctly on the block is close to the easiest cut an axeman of that century was ever asked to make. And the stroke that fell that morning, unlike the ones that fell on the old countess, landed true on the first attempt. On this neck, on this target, one attempt was all it took. I put a boy of 17 on my table once, in a river town in the Ohio Valley, in the middle of the 1990s. He had gone headfirst off a railway bridge into 4 feet of water on a dare. What had killed him was a clean transection of the cord high in the neck, at the 2nd and 3rd vertebrae, and I remember standing over him struck by how little force it had taken to do it. A young neck is all long open spaces and soft tissue and no wear. It comes apart, clean. An older body fights the same injury, resists it, spreads the load through stiffened joints and thickened bone. His did not. Hers would not have either. So the stroke that took Jane Grey did what the strokes on the older women could not. It landed in the hollow, passed between 2 vertebrae through the widest open disc space in the body, and cut the cord and the great vessels of the neck, the carotids and the jugulars, in a single clean pass. The witnesses recorded one blow. On this neck, one blow is exactly what the anatomy predicts. What that does to a person is as near to instant as death comes. The moment the cord is severed high in the neck, the brain is cut off from the body and the blood pressure supplying it collapses in the same heartbeat. Consciousness does not fade. It stops. Whatever the older women on this channel suffered across 3 strokes, or 11, this girl did not suffer, because the very thing the politics of her age exploited, her youth, also gave the blade the cleanest target a neck can offer, and gave her the fastest way out a body has. She was on the block, and then she was gone, in less time than it takes to say the words. That explains why the stroke was clean. It does not explain why the record spent 300 years insisting on the opposite, on a groping, blinded, drawn-out horror. For that, you have to stop looking at the neck and look at what a dead 16-year-old queen was worth to the people who told her story afterward. If taking a death the record dressed up in someone else's colors and reading it back to what the body would actually have done is the kind of work you came here for, the subscribe button is where you tell me to keep bringing them. There is one more finding on this file, and it is the strangest one. A dead 16-year-old queen was useful. To the Protestant writers who came up under the reign that followed, Jane was a martyr, a learned and pious girl, butchered by a Catholic queen for her faith. And the more helpless they could render her final moments, the sharper the indictment they were building. To a romantic painter 3 centuries after that, a blindfolded child reaching into the dark was the most moving single image an execution could give. Both had every reason to stretch the few seconds she fumbled for the block into the hole of her death. Neither had any reason to tell you it was over in one clean stroke, faster than fear could travel down a nerve. The body says the opposite of the painting. Where the painting shows a long, blind terror, the body shows the youngest neck on this table, taken in a single pass, gone quicker than the mind can register it. The record handed the gentlest death of this whole Tudor line to the youngest and least guilty of them, and then painted it as the most terrible thing in the room. It had the story exactly backward. There is one more thing the record cannot give me, and it is the thing that should have settled every part of this. The autopsy. Not a reconstruction from a chronicle. The body itself, on a table, where a pathologist could read the neck and end the argument in an afternoon. That examination was attempted, once, in 1876, and it failed in a way no other case on this table has ever failed. When the Victorians restored that chapel, the committee under a man named Doyne Bell took up the chancel floor and set out to identify the famous dead lying beneath it. They published what they found the following year. They found the queen beheaded by the sword and identified her. They found the old countess of the 11 strokes and identified her. They found the Duke of Northumberland, the man who had made Jane a queen, her own husband's father, and identified him. Every principal figure of her story rose out of that ground, got a name, and got a marked stone set into the new floor. The girl at the center of the whole affair did not come up at all. Bell recorded it plainly enough. The remains of Jane Grey and her husband were not found. He had been certain, before he lifted a stone, that they lay in the place of honor by the altar. The floor was opened, and the examination, in his own words, failed to afford any means of identifying the spot. This is not the absence of a lost tomb in a foreign desert, a body that vanished because no one ever knew where it was. This is a known grave in the most closely kept chapel in England that does not contain her. A body buried whole in 1554. In ground, the tower guarded, searched for by name 3 centuries later by the men who found everyone around her, and not there. Whether she was moved at some point in the chapel's long working life, or disturbed and scattered by the many later burials cut into that same small floor, or quietly carried off to her family's ground at Bradgate, as one old story holds, the file cannot say. The one examination that could have read this neck came back holding nothing. So the finding is signed on the record, and on the anatomy, and on a table that has to stay empty of her. Cause of death: complete transection of the cervical spinal cord and the great vessels of the neck, delivered by a single stroke of a heavy-edged axe, landing in the mid-cervical hollow that a young neck presents more cleanly than any other. Mechanism of death: instantaneous separation of the brain from its circulation and from the body, with immediate and total loss of consciousness. Of the deaths of this exact kind I have brought to this channel, the fastest. Manner of death: homicide. I have set out on this table before why a lawful execution still signs under that word, so I will not walk the whole road again. The manner records the hand that caused the death, not the law that permitted it, and there is no box on the form for a warrant with a queen's seal. Judicial in its form, homicide in its fact. Time of death: the morning of the 12th of February, 1554. A little after 10, 16, perhaps 17 years of age. The category history filed this death under is a tragic martyrdom. A blind girl groping in the dark, cut down for her faith. The correct category is narrower and colder, and in one small measure kinder than the legend. She died faster and cleaner than anyone else the axe took in that place, for the plainest anatomical reason there is. She was too young to have grown the body that makes an axe miss. They laid her under the chancel floor of that chapel, a few feet from the queen with the sword, and the countess with the 11 strokes, and the duke who had used her for his own reach at the crown. Every one of them had a hand in the 9 days that killed her. Every one of them was found and named and covered with a marked stone when the floor came up. She was not 9 days a queen, 16 years alive. A single clean stroke, gentler than the record has ever once admitted, on the youngest neck this table has held. And then, when the one examination that could have confirmed all of it finally went looking for her under the stones, 3 centuries on, she had already gone out of reach. The pawn taken cleanly off the board, and then taken off the board entirely. The ground kept every player who had moved her. It did not keep her. If a body came to your table carrying the story of this one, a single clean stroke on a 16-year-old neck, a death the record swears was a slow blind horror, and a grave that turns up empty on the day you finally open it, would you sign the mechanism as instantaneous on the strength of the anatomy alone, with no neck left in front of you to read? And would you write homicide over a warrant that carried a queen's seal? Tell me which line you would put down first. I read every comment. Thanks for watching.